Here we're looking at the relationship between aggregate expenditure and GDP with an example that's telling us that business inventories increased by $62 billion in a quarter. So we're looking at the short-term effect right here. You can see I've noted that for us. When we'd like to know, given the information that these inventories have increased, is aggregate expenditure higher or lower than GDP? And an important rule of thumb to remember, and what will essentially give us the answer here, is that when inventories rise, they rise as a result of aggregate expenditure being less than GDP. So AE, this is going to be our aggregate expenditure, could be concluded to be less than GDP. And as a result of that, that's where we're seeing these increase in inventories. And what we also see as an increase of these inventories and aggregate expenditure being less than GDP is that GDP and employment are going to decrease as a result here. So this is really just a general rule that we can see. And now there are a number, so this gives us the answer, I should tell us that. So what we're able to conclude is that aggregate expenditure in this case would be lower than GDP. But if you wanted to understand it a little bit better, we could explain another rule. In the case where aggregate expenditure is greater than GDP, what we would see is a fall in inventories. And then we would see this increase in GDP and employment. So there's this relationship that exists between the two, aggregate expenditure and GDP, and the results that come about from whatever inequality exists between the two is going to differ. But in this particular case, given that these inventories had gone up, we're able to conclude that aggregate expenditure must have been less than GDP.